Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We're going to give it a few minutes because we've got a lot of people registered, so we'll just give it another minute to let everyone get logged in, get comfortable. Great to see everyone popping up. I see a lot of very familiar names. Really good to see you all this afternoon for me, maybe this morning or evening for you. Hi all. Yep, there's a chat here. Good to see that a lot of you are using it already. You'll also notice there's a Q&A down at the bottom. Please feel free to use that thread. I'll be checking it out. We'll talk about that a little more in another minute or two. I'm just going to give it one more minute. Looks like a lot of people are already getting set up, so that's great. Okay. Looks like we've got a lovely turnout so far, so let's kick this off. Hi, everyone. Good time of day for you. I'm Sarah Gerke. I'm a journalist who's been dedicated to 3D printing since about 2014, first with 3dprint.com, now with my own editorial services company, Additive Integrity. I work with media and other clients in the industry, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar and to moderate today's discussion with Avi Reichental. Today's webinar is the 3D Printing Leadership Forum, Bold Action in Uncertain Times. To introduce our wonderful, bold leader here, we've got Avi Reichental, who is one of the most storied figures in the 3D printing industry, bringing decades of leadership experience. During his time as the CEO of 3D Systems, he led that company through the 2008 financial crisis. Before that, he was an executive leading the team at that company through the aftermath of the events of 9/11. Today, Avi is at the helm of XponentialWorks, continuing to lead in innovative technologies, and his characteristic boldness places him not only at the front of the teams involved with XponentialWorks, but in the eye of the 3D printing industry. Today, we're here to talk with Avi about the latest uncertainties as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to impact both people and businesses around the world. Many conversations have been focused on the impact to people and to healthcare, but today we're looking specifically at what that means for business in additive manufacturing. Avi's been through a lot as a leader, so we'll be turning his experiences into actionable takeaways for the 3D printing community today. What you can be doing, what maybe you should be doing, what it means to stay open through something like this and after it. This conversation will last about 45 minutes, and we really want it to be a conversation. So please feel free to submit questions in the Q&A form you see at the bottom of your screen. I've already seen one pop up. Keep them coming through the whole time. We're dedicating time at the end of the conversation for the Q&A, but when we see things pop up that are relevant to what we're talking about, we'll take those as we can. I'll be keeping an eye on that. I'll be calling on people or reading them, and Avi will get back to you about all of your thoughts. So with that, let's get started. Hi, Avi. Welcome. Thanks so much for having us all here today.
Yeah, hi, Sarah. It's a real pleasure, and thank you for stepping up and helping moderate this conversation. It's a timely and important conversation, and thank you everybody for joining. I see quite a few familiar names already, and it just speaks to the I think resiliency of our community. So let's get started.
Okay. Resilience is the key word that we're going to start with there. Avi, you've been through a lot of this before, these kinds of uncertainties. Can you share some of your experiences from previous business operations during times of crisis?
Sure, Sarah. It's there is never a playbook for events like this, and all of them have similarities and differences. I remember during 9/11, you know, that was more of a national security emergency, which decimated the financial markets as well, because it happened at the heart of Wall Street at the time. And what is important to remember from that is that financial markets can recover quickly, but companies' revenues and cash not so quickly. And in times like this, typically revenues fall a lot faster than any company can control their expenses. And you get to a period in which you really have to think about how much fuel you have in the tank. You know, we I think use this phrase a lot, cash is king, but in cases like this, it really, really is. And it's kind of a tale of two cities between early stage companies or pre-revenue companies and the revenue generating companies. And we can talk about that a little bit later. In '08, we experienced a complete meltdown of the financial system. And there, I think the recovery took a lot longer, and it was a real test of leadership. And not all businesses made it to the other side, unfortunately. I think for additive manufacturing, it actually propelled and launched additive manufacturing forward, because as an industry, we came out of the '08, '09 recession much stronger and healthier, and with many more players and participants as the market expanded. This one is kind of a double whammy in a way. We have a pandemic in which we're fighting for our lives, and at the same time, we are in a unique situation in which we're unable to visit customers, we're unable to leave our homes in many cases, we're unable to work in the old familiar way. And that creates a significant economic disruption, which we'll talk about.
How do you feel that the lessons you learned during these times of turbulence can transcend to calmer, kind of normal business environments?
Well, I think that I mean, for me personally, having gone, this will be now my fourth financial crisis. What you learn is that keeping calm, being honest and transparent, communicating clearly, being grounded in reality, and telling people the truth about the reality of our situation gives you at least the trust and the support of your customers, of your teammates and associates, and of your investors, because in times like this in particular, it's not the smartest leaders and teammates that survive, and it's not even the strongest. It's this is almost going back to the fundamental Darwinism here. It's those who have the ability to adapt and to challenge the situation, and to understand that in a crisis like this, it's probably going to get a lot worse before it's going to get better. And we need to be prepared for that. I don't think that we're going to be back to business by Easter, even though everybody wants to believe that, you know, in optimism. We have to be in realism here. And if you are startup, rethink your runway, rethink how much cash you have, and understand that in all likelihood, depending on your stage, you're not likely to be able to raise much during this period, because mainly VCs will first do the triage and the risk analysis on their existing portfolio, and which of the existing portfolio is worth saving and which is not. Unfortunately, they're going to make those life and death decisions for companies that they are supporting. If you're a larger company and you generate a lot of revenue, you really have to know day by day what your break even is, and at what, because your sales are going to drop a hell of a lot faster than your ability to reduce your expenses. And to the extent that you have any credit facilities, draw them down now, because they may not be as available next week and the week after. I remember in the 08-09 crisis, that was one of the very first things that I did at 3D Systems. We drew down our credit line, and it proved to be a really good move because it gave us enough fuel in the tank to actually manage during that period quite well and get stronger. And stay calm and communicate a lot and ask for help. Nobody, I mean, look, nobody is expecting leaders of companies to have all the answers. It's virtually impossible and unrealistic. So have the humility to ask for help. Many companies are fortunate to be surrounded by a great deal of experienced board members and advisors. This is the time to lean on them. Our industry is very collaborative by nature. If there was ever a time to reach out, now is a good time to do that. And you know, being grounded in reality and understanding what can and cannot do is really, really important in times like this.
Definitely. Avi, what does leadership mean to you in times like this? We're talking about bold leadership. What does it mean, especially in a 3D printing company, to be a leader?
Look, I think that there are several elements of leadership that come into play. The first is to make sure that you know where you're going, which in uncertain times is much harder. And so you need to have plans for your worst case scenario and your best case scenario. And those have to be revised almost daily as the situation unfolds. In times like this, Sarah, you learn a lot about your organization to the extent that you have organizational weaknesses. They're going to be in your face in times like this. You know, they may be hidden or disguised, or you may be telling yourself all kinds of stories about what can and cannot be done. You also learn a lot about the strength of your product and your business model in times like this, because there is no place to hide. And that's the opportunity to have the courage to take right action on a daily basis, not to be in denial, but to be in reality. And, you know, we have all these sayings, you know, there's never a good time to make a tough decision. And, you know, we read about it, we learn about it, we hear about it. There really isn't any time to hesitate as a leader in times like this, because the ultimate mission here is to sail the ship to a safe harbor while conditions are changing, while the storm is brewing, while you may not have enough fuel or enough wind to get there, and you certainly don't have all the navigational instruments and charts, and stay calm doing it and ask for help.
Perfect. Okay, when we're talking about asking for help and actions that people can really be taking, Avi, I understand you've got 5 actions prepared that AM companies need to take to keep their doors open through the pandemic and then thrive once we're on the other side of it.
Yeah, yes, sir. I thought about it a lot, and I looked into what I have triaged and had to implement in our companies, which are to a large extent all in generative and additive technologies. And I wasn't that clever when I did it a few weeks ago because it was just about taking the action. But as I reflected on it last night, I wordsmith it a little bit. I can't help myself sometimes with the marketing side of me. So because it's the COVID-19 crisis, I try to start every action with a C. I just couldn't help myself. Uh, and the first and most important one is communication. And with communication here, we have a responsibility to, when in doubt, over communicate with clarity and transparency to all of our stakeholders, and above all, not to sugarcoat the situation. There are going to be a lot of great success stories to talk about here, but we can't sugarcoat the reality of our situation, not with our employees, not with our customers, not with our fellow resellers who are definitely in the same boat with us, and certainly not with investors and suppliers. I think that credibility and trust will come from over communicating. So communication is the first bold action, because we have never before been called to communicate at the level that we have to communicate now. And it doesn't always come naturally. So reach deeper inside yourself. The second is continuity. In times like this, we have to make sure on a daily basis that our team is safe, first and foremost, and they were not put in harm's way for any kind of business expediency. And yet, in some instances, as we're finding, 3D printing is becoming very, very essential to fighting the pandemic and for continuity of life. So we need to balance team safety and continuity and the needs of the business. And we need to come up with contingencies. You know, continuity means that we, on a daily basis, figure out all of the contingencies from a doomsday scenario to a bright future scenario and everything in between. The third is cash. And I mentioned cash previously, but I want to kind of double click on it a little bit here. Cash is king in any season. It's absolutely critical to survival, which means every company is going to have to make cash preservation decisions. And it's going to split between companies that need investment because they're in early stage, and early stage companies will absolutely have to adjust the runway and adjust their spending. This is not a period in which business will continue as usual. We don't know if this is a 3-month disruption, a 6-month disruption, or longer. And with what we know today, we have to conserve cash. Larger companies need to know on a daily basis where their break-even point is so that they can really adjust for that. And that means we're also going to be in an environment in which it will be much harsher to raise and harder to raise venture capital. It's going to be harder for a period of time to access credit if you don't already have it. And while the stimulus package is coming, governments, central governments and our federal government are not well known for agile execution. So before we feel it, it's going to take time. The fourth action is change. And the first thing that I would recommend to everybody is, if you haven't done it already, throw away your 2020 plans, because now is the time to assess the reality of your situation and prepare for the worst and best case scenarios. And you know what? The companies that will be the most adaptable in a period like this will really be the companies that will be able to not only survive, but thrive on the other side. There are significant opportunities in this period to reinvent business models and go to market. And yes, for additive manufacturing, COVID-19, may prove to be the kind of growth catalyst that finally takes us into the mainstream, because I think that to a large extent, there are two very interesting themes that are already emerging for us as an industry. One is that there's going to be a massive supply chain disruption, and the way that companies and organizations will look at what's my cost per part will be calculated very differently, because you know what, when you don't have parts for 30 or 60 or 90 days, you begin to look at how you compute cost per part very differently. And the other is design agility. I think that our entire industry is already shining through by the agility and resiliency and inventiveness that 3D printing can bring to any problem. And I think that that will come through into the recovery phase. So there are real opportunities here also to redefine the whole industry's value proposition around supply chain disruption and design agility. And it's also a time to reposition your own company in terms of resources and channels and go to market. We're not going to go back to the old normal after this. We're going to be into a new paradigm, into a new normal in which increased virtual and digital components in the business model, from how we deliver content, how we do demos, how we communicate, how we provide customer success and applications, will all evolve and change. And while this pandemic will pass, the crisis will pass, the lessons will probably stay with us for the rest of our lives. And I'll say another thing, not everybody, unfortunately, is going to make it in good shape out of this crisis. So if there has ever been an opportunity to collaborate more and to seek some uncommon partnerships, to gain access to anything that you need in your business, this is really, there's never been a better time to find some uncommon partners that you may have not considered in the past. And finally, the fifth one, Sarah, is courage. And courage is the courage to lead, the courage to be in reality and not in denial, the courage to act with agility and boldness, and the clarity of mind to be in consultation with your internal team and your external community so that you can take the right actions across the board for your employees, your customers and investors, for the preservation of your business, to ask for help and lean on your board and community because nobody expects you to have all the answers, and to practice honesty and transparency even when it's inconvenient, even when it's tough. So,
Perfect.
yeah.
All right. Avi, you actually touched on a couple of the questions people have been submitting in there. So I want to just kind of take a second to dig into a little bit of those. For your advice from a leader to the people, who are working out there and the reaction that leadership is having. Two questions here go really nicely hand in hand. Sarah asked, how does one keep their sanity? She says, I'm getting at least 100 emails per hour about building new devices in order to effectively lead. My brain is taxed and I'm an excellent multitasker with so much happening. And then Yulia says, what is your advice for those leaders who haven't trusted people with remote work, but are now forced to deal with it? How can they build trust?
Yeah, well, let's take it one at a time. Sarah, I hear you, and you and I think, corresponded yesterday about the hundreds of emails that we're getting. One keeps sanity here by collaborating, by talking and reasoning things out, and also by making sure that in this physical isolation, we stay connected with ourselves, with our well-being. It's a pretty good idea to take some walks if you can, without violating any social distancing, and to get out of your head a little bit and be in your body, and exercise a little bit or meditate, if you can do it. These are kind of old cliched pieces of advice, but they really work, particularly in tough times. But I think that Sarah is also asking a question about not just sanity, but about how do we make sure that we become a collaborative, effective, and productive force multiplier as a community? And there, I think that we have an opportunity to coalesce and convene and curate maybe a more effective allocation and use of our resources, because we're all getting the same questions every day. Can you help me in my local community with some protective masks and protective gear? And I think we've seen some tremendous examples of designs, that can make that happen, from Perusa and from other companies that, we ought to figure out how to scale, right, and coordinate. Ventilators, I must have gotten 24 incoming requests in the last week and a half, about all the way from producing compact ventilators by 3D printing to producing valves and splitters. And again, if there was a way for us to quickly figure out, as a result of this conversation, how do we begin to organize ourselves into a scalable and impactful force, not into a group of individuals, but kind of harnessing the collective power and capacity and intellect that we have to execute. I think we can be more productive, and maybe then we'll get fewer emails. I don't know. Can you remind me of the second question?
Of course. What is your advice for those leaders who haven't trusted people with remote work, but are now forced to deal with it? How can they build that trust?
Well, I think that my advice to leaders that don't trust remote work is to get with it, get real, in the sense that I don't think at the end of this, we're coming back to the same office environment or facility environment. I think that we're blessed that we have all this connectivity, and we live in a period in which Zoom is fast becoming a verb, but to me, this is informing and shaping and acting as a catalyst for the future of work. And the future of work is going to be based heavily on telepresence technologies, on mixed reality between augmented and real. It's going to be based on much more collaboration with technologies like AI. And on the one hand, we're blessed that we have all this connectivity already, and it's been around for a while, but not fully embraced, or else we couldn't be having this conversation right now. But in my mind, we're not going back. We're gonna push forward. And one of the gifts, if there is such a thing, out of this horrible pandemic, is that we will be forced to embrace it, and it will become a new friend, and our conversations in the future will be shaped and informed by it, because not only is it going to leap us forward in a positive way, there's going to be a lot of trauma that we're going to take with us on the other side of it. And also we need to be prepared. You know, part of continuity is this may reoccur. COVID-19 may reoccur before the end of this year, you know, as we get into the winter of 2020, because we're not yet close enough to a vaccine. And I can imagine that just because of what we are going through organizationally, every time when there is a little hiccup, we will immediately default to the same operating mode as we are today. So part of continuity is, and part of being in reality is understanding that not only may we not go back to work by Easter, but you know, we might have a reoccurrence of this in some fashion by Halloween time. I'm not wishing it on anybody, but we need to be prepared.
Absolutely, and that takes us to the next area you had planned, Avi, to discuss about proactive leadership strategies. When we're looking at what people can really do to be proactive, to drive transformation and sustainable solutions. So when we look at strategic shifts during crisis, do you see that they often lead to sustained changes in strategy when businesses back to normal, whatever that new normal is?
Well, I really believe that, and this is another one of those old adages that necessity is the mother of invention, and that in times like this, our real purpose and mission as a business and as individuals typically kind of comes into greater focus, and it often provides us with the clarity for a next phase of growth. So for example, for me, in the 2008-2009 recession, what became obvious is that 3D systems could not have continued and survived absent some augmentation of activities, and that we would not have made it just on selling printers and materials during that period. And that's when we began to develop the whole on-demand parts business, the acquisition of some service bureaus, which proved to be very successful and kind of saw the company through a very tough period and propelled it forward, and in essence triggered kind of an industry following by Stratasys and others that discovered that this was a pretty meaningful way to expand. The other big, if you will, strategic insight that I got from the 08-09 recession was that there was a real opportunity for 3D systems to firmly enter into the whole healthcare side of the business, which in hindsight became one of the fastest growing and the most successful parts of 3D systems for the next few years. And in fact, when you look back at the period from 09 to about 2014, the company came out and really realized its prime growth and performance immediately in the periods following the 08 and 09 recession, which tells me that some of the best growth strategies in repositioning and go-to-market can be born out of a period like this, because it really forces leaders to look at everything. For me today, what I'm doing in my companies is I'm looking at everything. How are we going to market? What kind of different tools and technology can we use to reach customers in a more meaningful and intimate way and service them better? What kind of technology can we take out of this crisis and put in the hands of our reseller community so that they can become more productive and more effective? How do we begin to, as an industry, redefine the narrative of our value proposition? I kind of touched on that a little bit when I said really it's all about design agility and supply chain disruption. And yes, we're gonna have, I mean, for those of us who have meaningful healthcare businesses that come out of this, and I'm not talking just about protective gear, because that I look at that as a temporary, meaningful stopgap, but not a long-term business model. But for those of us who have opportunities to really plug into some of the pivots that are going to happen in supply chain as a result of it, and all of the government contracts that will come out of it, and all of the repurposing of some factories. I mean, we read every day now about partnerships last night between GM and Ford and others to help with ventilators, Elon Musk jumping into it, and also General Motors and Ventec. There could be some very interesting short-term gains because the need to resupply or properly supply our emergency preparedness systems, which obviously we're not all that prepared, is great. And there could be some opportunities there. But in the main, I would urge everybody to think about what's your business past this and how do you get there day by day.
It's perfect. All right, Avi, it looks like we've got just a few minutes left, so I'd love for us to get to some Q&A. We've got a nice active discussion going. Len has asked a great question, so I'm going to go ahead and turn on your mic now, Len, so you can go ahead and ask Avi that.
Avi, thank you very much for the presentation, and it's good to hear someone whose feelings and echoes my experience and my perspective as well. One of the biggest lessons from past downturns is that, as well as actively managing operations and cash flow today and tomorrow, the market leaders will be preparing now for the upturn after this low, particularly by getting the fundamentals right and investing in innovation. Now, I wonder if the current attention on 3D printing, on additive manufacture, not just in manufacturing, but in spare parts management as well, means that 3D printing firms, both equipment providers and service providers, should they be preparing for an even stronger demand once we start seeing the turning of the tide? How does that fit? I mean, does that fit with what you see ahead?
Well, Len, I think that this is an excellent question, and I will give you my view. Yes, over meaningful periods, I think that 3D printing, additive manufacturing will greatly benefit from this period of disruption, because it's going to cause everybody to redesign how they think about design to manufacturing cycle times, and particularly how they think about supply chains. I think that we are in for a few years of massive re-engineering and disruption of supply chain as we know it, because the penalties that were paid, you know, just during the cessation of supply from China, we haven't felt all the pain from all these shortages fully yet. However, in the here and now, in the immediate term, what most companies are going to do is they're going to figure out how to hang on to their cash. You know, until they see some clarity, which means they're going to freeze spend as much as they can. They're going to postpone and delay purchases unless they're mission critical. Yes, they will begin to talk about the importance of reassessing and reinventing their business and how do they accelerate introduction of new products to the market. But they will also wait to see when and if customers and consumers return to purchasing behaviors. And since we're neither in the toilet paper nor the hand sanitizer business, we're gonna have to kind of watch a little bit carefully in the short term how our customers are behaving and are they still releasing orders. I mean, I wouldn't even fully trust purchase orders that we have in-house today, because those also could be delayed or deferred or, God forbid, even canceled. And I have to tell you that just in the last maybe 72 hours, I heard from a few really good friends of mine who already lost their businesses. And so we'll see the failures and kind of a little bit of an economic freeze, I think, before we see an abundance on the other side of it. And we need to be prepared for both.
Definitely. Okay, thank you so much, Len. Avi, we're going to move on to the next couple of questions we've got from Michael. I'm going to unmute you now so you can ask your two great questions. If it listens to me clicking. Awesome. Michael, are you there? Okay, I'm not seeing him on the attendees anymore either. Anyway, Michael asked, what are your thoughts about the current response from the AM sector to the pandemic? And he followed that up with his follow-up question. I'm seeing a lot of duplication of efforts as various enterprises seek to set up databases and lists of 3D printing capacity. It's a similar story with duplication of the various PPE design files. When should a leader lead, and when should a leader put aside ego and collaborate, possibly even with the editor?
Well, I think these are two great questions from Michael Patch. I imagine you're talking about Michael Patch.
It is Michael Patch, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've been first naming everyone.
Thanks, yeah. Thanks, Michael, for the questions and for attending. First, I think that the response from the additive manufacturing community is nothing short of fabulous and heroic. I saw some examples of teammates going to work with protective gear so that they can make more protective gear, you know, for others. The response speaks to the inventiveness, passion, resiliency, and resourcefulness of our community. And it once again reminds me that, you know, we really have a unique community here in the sense that I've always thought about additive manufacturing as kind of the version of Hotel California, right? I mean, you check in and you never check out because everybody who gets inducted becomes addicted to what we do, and it's kind of a one way in, and we build on that. So I think the response has been tremendous, and I think it will serve us well in the future because it reminds the world and validates, you know, the agility, the flexibility, and the free complexity that comes with 3D printing. I think that the second question, Michael, is similar to what I said to Sarah a little bit earlier in response to her question, which is we absolutely need to more formally organize curate and convene this effort. And I think that we certainly need to figure out how to put principles and impact here ahead of people and personalities and egos. There is room for everybody to play, and as an industry, there is room for all of us to shine through collaborations. And that was one of my previous calls to action when I said, if there ever was a time to collaborate, now is the time. And now is the time also to create some uncommon partnerships, the partnerships that may not have been conceivable 30 or 60 days ago, could convene and collaborate now in the name of this global emergency. And I think, Michael, that people like you and like Sarah and myself who are involved and have interests community-wide also have a role to play here. We ought to, by example, maybe figure out how to create such a platform. And I know, Michael, that you already created an incredible platform. Let's work together and let's call and talk. Let's convene at least the leadership discussion that enables us to bring the collective wisdom, but also the collective capacity and the collective impact that the industry can deliver during a period like this.
Absolutely. I think that's such a powerful message, and one we all should be paying attention to, that this industry, above all, that I've seen, has been amazing at working together, but now more than ever, we really need that. We have to work together to get through this from a business and a human perspective. And that also leads us, we're going to take a couple more questions. We're running a little bit over right now, so if you can just bear with us for a few more minutes. We've just got a few more really great questions in the queue here. I don't think, unfortunately, we'll be able to get to everyone, but I'm going to wrap a couple of these up together because we're seeing some definite themes emerge here. So a question from Italy says that lots of 3D printing business and community contributions to medical supply shortages are happening currently. How does a company, especially a small startup with limited resources, balance their organization's valuable outreach potential with their own business priorities during challenging times? And this also works really well with Joshua's question, that he's part of a Discord server with people from across the world working to get 3D printed PPE to hospitals to help supply nurses and doctors to fight the battle on the front lines. What else do you think I could do to help? So we're looking at a lot of outreach, what people can do to help, small organizations, individuals. And I think there's actually a third question here that tied into this as well, from Rupa. Where can we find current 3D printing opportunities other than medical related products? So Avi, where do you really see the help coming? What can we do?
Well, I think that there are a few things that we can do. One is it would be good to begin to quickly map talent, capacity, and need so that we can begin to organize it and channel it where it's needed and when it's needed, because we have, I think, mismatch between talent, capacity, and local emergency needs. And that's not a complicated thing to do if we can begin to create a coordinated emergency response on the part of the community. And I'm raising my hand to help here. And I think, Sarah, with your help and with Michael's help, we can tap a lot of capable people and begin to coordinate it like a global project with priorities and resources and allocation of those. And making some good progress there. The second is, what should you focus on? Should you focus on the survival of your business and also try to help if you have limited resources? It's not a simple question to answer, because you're asking me, do you choose the survival of humanity over the survival of my business? I mean, that's really the implied question here. And my answer is, it's not an either or, it's a both and. And what I know about myself is that in this period, I'm probably working twice as many hours as I would have worked 30 days ago. And I was never a slacker in my life, but I know that during this period of high emergency and heightened anxiety, one of the ways that I keep myself calm is by working more. So maybe that's part of the answer. Did I miss something, Sarah?
No, that's a good point. So we've still got a couple of questions in here. To answer one of them that just came in from Leon, yes, the recording of today's cast will be made available. Later, it is being recorded. So it's nice to have a question I can answer quickly. Okay, great. We've got one more great observation in from Len. We in the 3D printing world should use the current focus on resolving supply chain disruptions to get the message of value that 3D printing brings to the supply chain decision makers, not just design and manufacturing. The advantages in lead time resolution and lots of one speak to cash flow and service level efficiency, and we have some excellent examples to use. We need to refocus who our audiences that will really drive order and growth in the short and medium term, which I think is a really great observation, Len. Thank you for sharing again.
Yeah, that reminds me, Sarah, of the third question of what else can we do during this period besides helping the medical emergency. And I think, Len, you're spot on in the sense that 3D printing can really shine through this period by teaching people how effective and resilient supply chain really works, and how you can both conserve cash flow and tooling costs and going to production and avoiding unnecessary supply chain disruptions by leaning more and integrating a healthy and a vibrant 3D printing strategy into your supply chain, which is part of the two, I think, big repositioning themes that come out of this period, which is greater design agility powered by 3D printing and a reinvented supply chain powered by 3D printing. I think those are the two main themes that as an industry, we need to fine tune and sharpen and hone and then go teach the world, you know, how do you design and manufacture in post coronavirus times.
Exactly. I think those are some great takeaways. And we're closing in on almost an hour now of discussion. We've still got questions in the queue. We still have more coming in, but we're going to go ahead and wrap this up for today. We will be doing another virtual conference soon because we can see that this is a discussion that's going to be continuing for a long time. We're really glad to be a part of it. There have been some great questions coming in. We've got more for ourselves that we had prepared, so there's a lot to talk about. And we're so thankful for all of you joining us today. It's been a great conversation. Thank you for being part of it, for asking questions in the Q&A, for keeping the chat going, for just tuning in. And again, this is being recorded, so we'll be able to share this out with you later and with your colleagues who weren't able to join us live. So also hello to everyone joining us at a different time. We thank you so much. And Avi, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everybody for joining us. We will definitely continue the conversation and make something happen out of it. Above all, everybody, please stay safe and stay healthy.
Please do. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Thanks for having me be part of this conversation. And we look forward to continuing this conversation in the future. Everyone stay well, stay healthy, stay at least 6 feet apart from other people. Social distance is important, but stay connected virtually. Have a wonderful day and everybody be well. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.